Welcome to a new, very interesting episode of the Omnis Studio Web Development Basics Training Series. Today, we will look at how to access a database with an Omnis Studio application using table classes. Have fun! In the preceding episode, we wrote data to a list for the first time in this course and then saved it temporarily. That's good, but if you want to access other users' data, or even your own in the future, then unfortunately, this is not possible. That would require to write the data to a database and retrieve it from there. Well, and that's exactly what we're going to do now. By the way, you don't need to install a database to follow along with me, because we're simply using a SQLite database, and you don't need any additional tools or installations for this. If you don't know what that is, don't worry. SQLite is really easy to understand, and you don't need any special experience with databases for this video. With the Omnis Studio Community Edition, you can access SQLite, Microsoft Express, or PostgreSQL databases. With the Professional Edition of Omnis Studio, you can use all relational database systems. If you would like to see a special video about the connection to a PostgreSQL database, please let me know in the comments and I will be happy to add it. So, now let's get to it. As you can see, I have opened our familiar library again, because I now want to save the contacts that we enter in the JS Contacts contact form in a database, and also to be able to see the existing contacts in the list. Wait a minute. I'll open this for a moment so that we can see the existing contacts from the database here in this list. To achieve this, we should start by creating the database or the necessary tables in the database and establishing the database connection in the app. Therefore, I go back to the Studio browser and go to the SQL Browser here. This is a tool for editing databases, designing queries, and so on. But before we can do all this, we first have to set up a connection to the database. This can be done via the Session Manager, and then New Session. Here, we can give the session a name. I just call it SQLite. We can select the database type, in our case as SQLite, and, quite important, we can enter the address to the database here, which in our case is a path to the SQLite file. If it's a PostgreSQL database, for example, then this would probably be an IP address. But first, we have to create our SQLite database or the database file. This can also be done here, using the plus symbol here. I just leave the name of the file as it is, and that's it. A small hint. Copy the path to the database file once. We'll need it again later. Apart from that, we don't need to set anything else here, as the SQLite database has no username, no password, no port, and so on. Okay, then let's open the session. So here we go back. Click on Open Session and select our session, SQLite. Now the first item we see here is the choice between tables and views. But for now, we are only interested in the tables. And as we have only just created the database, we do not yet see any tables here, with the exception of the systems tables, local and Omnis. Okay, so now let's create a new table for our contacts. I should click on New Table here, just like this, and then define the name of the table here and the columns down here. But last time we had created a schema class for our, let's call it temporary list. And the good news now is that we can simply drag this schema class into our SQLite session, and then it becomes a database table. But before I do that, I want to add a column to the schema. So we can close the window again. Here is our schema, SC contact list, and here I want to add a column for the ID so that each contact can be uniquely identified by this ID. Here's a new column. I just call it ID. That will be a sequence. That's a column that automatically counts up. And now, very important, I set primary key to ktrue at the end. This basically just means that this is the main key, i.e., the column by which this data record is usually identified. OK. Now click and drag the number here to move the column to the first position, and assign the name at the top here, i.e., what the table should be called later in the database. Contacts. Done. Then I would say we can now create the database table with the schema. So just drag and drop the schema into the tables of the session. And if we now take a look here, then we can see our new table here. Wonderful. And now we just need to integrate it into our app. Before we can do this, however, we also need to establish a connection to the database in the app. And we do this in the remote task. So in here, create a new method, dblogin. And now the whole thing is actually relatively simple. We create a new task variable, tsessionObj. This will later hold the database session. And we use a task variable so that this variable is available for as long as the app is open. If this seemed a bit cryptic to you, you should watch our video about variable scopes again. You will also find the link to it in the description. Then, the type is object, and the subtype is now the appropriate database object. In our case, one for SQLite. We find this here under External Objects, and then SQLite Session, relatively far down. Perfect. Now, we just have to say here in the code, do tsessionObj.$logon. The first thing we put in here is the host name. In our case, the path to the database file that we have so cleverly placed in the clipboard. And for the username and password, I simply write #null and #null, as we don't have one, but the methods absolutely want to have something entered. Now we have to call the method from the $construct so that it is triggered automatically. So overwrite the construct once here, and then do method dblogin. Very good. We have already set up the connection. Now we still have to use it. And classically, we don't do this directly via the remote form, but with the help of so-called table classes. Then I would say, let's create a new class, a table class. And there is also a naming convention here. Table classes always start with TA, and that's why I'm calling this one TA contact list. Contact list because this class will be responsible for the contact list. And the next step is to tell the class that it gets the data from the database table contacts. This is done via the property SQL class name. Here we simply select the schema from which we created the table. And we still have to say which task the class belongs to, and that can be done here with design task name. And that is, of course, the remote task. And what do we need the table class for now? If we take a look at the methods here, we see things like $insert, $select, $fetch, all methods that we need to interact with our table in the database. And that's exactly what the class is for. Everything that has to do with the table goes in here. As a result, we have much cleaner code later on. And there are also a few things that we can or must do directly here. First, we have to tell the table class in the construct which session object it should use. This is the variable or object that we have created in the remote task. And as it is a task variable, we can also access it from here. So we write here, do $cinst.$session object.$assign, and then tsessionObj. We also have to say that we never want to insert the ID column into the table, as this is assigned by the database itself. As a reminder, we said that it should be incremented automatically. Well, we enter do $calls.id.$exclude from insert.$assign k true. In other words, $cinst stands for the current instance of the table class. For example, your list should exclude or omit the ID from your columns, $calls, when saving. And then we can go straight to loading the data. To do this, I create a new method and call it $load. The dollar is important here. The name doesn't matter as long as you remember it. The $sign only means that we can also call methods from outside this class, i.e. later from our form. And to load the data, we actually only need two of the predefined methods. These are the $select and $fetch methods. So we write here, do $cinst.$select. We can insert an SQL where clause here, but as we want to load all the data, we don't need it. And then we still have to fetch data, so do $cinst.$fetch. And since we want to have them all, kfetch all. Super. Now we can go back to our remote form. And the first thing we do is swap the subtype of our list and the row. Now we don't select the schema directly, but the table class, TAContactList, we just created. Here again, TAContactList. Thus, the list and the row are constructed according to the table class, and both have the functions just implemented. So that we can now say directly here in the construct, do I contactlist.$load. This causes all existing data to be loaded directly into the list when the form is opened. So we can now theoretically display data. Next, we still have to implement the capability to also enter data. And that's what we want when we click on the button here. And since we no longer want to write it directly into the list variable, but directly into the database, we can omit it here and simply say, do I contact entry row.$insert. And to make sure that the new data we entered are also displayed, do I contactlist.$load. And that's it. It is important to note that a $insert only works with a row variable, as it is not clear which row is to be inserted with a list variable. So then I would say, fingers crossed that everything works. Let's test it now. So I'll enter John and Ford. Wonderful. Not quite. As we only display two columns, and the first one is the ID, we can't see the whole contact, but we can quickly fix that. To do this, we go to the properties of the data grid, and under Appearance, we set the design columns to 3. And to make sure the data are displayed properly, we quickly set the column widths to 33, 33, and 33. So, once again. Top. You can already see it as the data are loaded again. And when I now enter something new, Tom and Ford. Perfect. Well, this video was a bit longer than usual, but I really found it difficult to shorten the subject without leaving out anything important, or to find a sensible separation into two videos, so I hope you'll forgive me. A small enhancement that you could perhaps implement yourself would be to add the data record with the Enter key instead of having to press the button. If you need help with this, please write it in the comments. Then maybe another user can help you, or of course we will respond. All right, take care and see you next time.